serve as the Assistant Provost for Leadership and Chair of the Department of Leadership Studies at the Citadel, where she taught the next generation of our state leaders. Please join me in welcoming Kate. Emery Campbell is a native son who left his home early but later returned as an advocate for constructive programs and policies. He has worked at the Comprehensive Health Agency and Jasper Counties. He has worked throughout Sea Islands addressing environmental issues which affect the daily lives of island people with the aim of preserving and enhancing the unique and rich Gullah heritage in the face of rapid development on the islands. He has been the executive director of Penn Center, where he led the initiative to revive the center's historical significance as a means of preserving Sea Island culture. Dr. Campbell has appeared in many documentaries, news magazines, film, and radio programs, including 60 Minutes, the Today Show, the PBS special Family Across the Sea. He is a published author, and his works include Gullah Cultural Legacies, a synopsis of the Gullah, and the Gullah Days, Hilton Head Islanders Before the Bridge, co-written with Tom Barnwell and Carolyn Grant. Please join me in welcoming again Dr. Campbell. Ben Cunningham is Senior Managing Attorney at the South Carolina Environmental Law Project, a non-profit public interest law firm whose mission is to protect the natural environment of South Carolina by providing legal services and advice to environmental organizations and concerned citizens, and by improving the state system of environmental regulation. He's worked at the South Carolina Environmental Law Project since May of 2019 and has a passion for preserving South Carolina's natural resources for this and future generations. He loves spending time with his family. It's very nice. Not all people are saying. The outdoors and drawing and painting and basketball in all its forms. Among the many cases and issues he has focused on, many have environmental justice implications. Please join me in welcoming Ben Cunningham. Dr. Margaret Washington is Marie Underhill Lowell Professor of American History at Cornell University. Her research focuses on African American cultural, intellectual, and religious history, gender, and the American South. She is the author of the award-winning book, A Peculiar People, Slave Religion and Community Culture Among the Gullah, and the biography, Sojourner Truth's America, also an award-winning work. She has been featured in several PBS documentaries, including Tell Them We Are Rising, the story of Black colleges and universities, and God in America. Among her works are the prize-winning Sojourner Truth's America and her edition of The Narrative of Sojourner Truth. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Washington. Jack Smith is a partner of Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough, LLP, in their Charleston office. He practices in the area of environmental law and litigation, land use and zoning, administrative law, and constitutional law. His extensive knowledge of environmental policy and regulation stems from his prior work for state and federal government agencies. He has held attorney positions with the Office of Coastal Resources Management, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the South Carolina Coastal Council, where he was staff attorney. Mr. Smith's environmental practice includes matters of administrative law, land use and planning, zoning law. His experience includes counseling on environmental liability issues of real property ownership and transactions, brownfields redevelopment projects, negotiations of contract language for contaminated property transactions, and environmental insurance. Welcome, Mr. Smith. Quet Marquetta L. Goodwine, Chieftess of the Gullah Geechee Nation, is a published author, computer scientist, lecturer, mathematician, historian, preservationist, environmental justice advocate, and the artivist. She is the founder of the advocacy organization for the continuation of Gullah Geechee culture, the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition. Queen Quet has not only given histo-musical presentations throughout the world, she has also raised awareness of the Gullah Geechee. She was the first person to speak on behalf of her people before the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, and in 2018 represented them at the Global Action Summit. Among her many honors, Queen Quet was one of the first of 7 inductees into the Gullah Geechee Nation Hall of Fame. For the work that she has done for her home state, and especially in protecting and continuing the Gullah Geechee culture, she has also been presented with the Order of the Palmetto Award, the highest honor given to a citizen in South Carolina. Please join me in welcoming Queen Quet. Okay, thank you and welcome, everyone. Thank you and welcome, everyone. Yes. I would like to ask each of you, and I think we'll begin at this end and work our way that way, to just talk about why you do what you do and why you felt it was so important for you to be here this evening with us.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It is a pleasure to be here. I have been coming to Penn Center for a long time, since the early 80s. I won't tell you exactly when, because that'll tell you how old I am. But this has really been a place of solace and commemoration. And I came down here when I was a practicing lawyer running the Bar Foundation. I had the chance to spend some time with Mr. Campbell, Mr. Barnwell, talking about heirs property, because it seemed to be an intractable problem. But how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I came down here to learn some of the techniques that they had used to help people hold on to their land. And so we were able to get the Ford Foundation to support the work. And then I went on to become a law professor because I wanted to work on the solutions to the problem. And so I've written about heirs property, but all of that is driven of a love of the land, the community, and the people. This is really an important context to tie ourselves to the land. You know, growing up, barefoot was my footwear of choice, and we had the freedom to ride through the countryside, a freedom that people like my niece, they don't get to do that these days, right? But being in nature is a place where you feel closer to God. And in our church, that's part of the seeking process, right? You spend that time, that quiet time. But it's also a sense of community where you can come back and see the elders that have helped to train you along the way. When I come from the 4-mile community of Mount Pleasant, part of the Gullah Geechee culture, and anybody up and down that highway had the right to call me out and tell me and tell my mother what I was doing, right? Because it was a community, right? And those are the people and the feelings that give you a sense of home and place. But as Dr. Babb said, it also gives you a key to your history. And so through land records, I've been able to connect to my great-great-great-grandfather who was enslaved on Hamlin Plantation. And he was then able to purchase 10 acres of land from the family that had once enslaved him. That makes you stand up a little taller. Amen. Because you know that that dream of land ownership came from right here at Penn Center in Beaufort County in Port Royal. We had more African American landowners in this state than anywhere else in the country during Reconstruction. And it is our charge to hold on to what we have left. So that is what drives my work at the Coastal Conservation League, to work with communities, to empower communities, to speak up for themselves, to work through the land use process, and to keep this place of home a community.
said. Thank you for having me today, and it's really humbling to be up here with these people who have lived their commitment for so long. And why I am here and why I am involved in land and community is because I think it's a sense of hope, a sense of responsibility, and a sense that what the past is not the future is not set, so we can't make up for what's happened in the past, but we can make everything a lot better. We don't have the luxury of saying we don't know what's going to happen, or we don't know how this might affect the community, because we know, we've seen it over the years. And because of that, I practice law. I practice what Dr. Campbell, unfortunately, it's the more unjust version, as some of you may know. But it's not, unfortunately, that's what we have to deal with. And it's important to know that you have somebody like the South Carolina Environmental Law Project to represent communities, or the Coastal Conservation League, the Gullah Geechee community, to go into those forums and fight, because that is what is required right now. And if we don't fight, and if we let them do what they want to do and develop and take community property with no humility, then we're going to be even worse off. And part of what I always say is why I got involved in environmental work is because of my son, who's 4. And it's my responsibility that he have some of the same opportunities that I have had, that we have had. And going forward, they need to have the children that are children now, that will be children later. That's all of our responsibility. And that's why I do what I do.
Well, it certainly is a pleasure to be here. I haven't been to St. Helena for at least 10 years, and every time I come here, I am amazed by the beauty and surprised by the change. To me, community is something that I have grappled with ever since I was an undergraduate, with the idea of wanting to become an activist, and my mother telling me, okay, girl, but how are you going to eat? And then I said, well, okay, then what I want to do is I want to become an academic, and I want to focus on community. And that led me to want to write about people who sustain community. And I was already someone who was deeply interested in South Carolina as a subject, and I started reading about the people of the islands, off the coast of Charleston and St. Helena, Data, Coosaw, and it really rang a bell with me in terms of what community represented: the accountability, the maintenance, the sustaining, the way of making sure that you are part of a group. And so I got into the idea of community, and I wrote A Peculiar People, because I saw the people of I had to focus on one place, and that was St. Helena. St. Helena was special because of the northern women and some men who came and set up the school. So we had an example of the beauty of community and how community could be sustained through the efforts of these women and the people on the island who were determined to get something out of this civil war. And they did. They got land. And gradually they started to lose that land, which is really why we're here today. But it's a wonderful story of how a community can survive, how it can thrive, how it can grow, and how it can struggle. And so resistance has always been a part of what I look at in terms of community, especially the African American community, because our struggle has been one of resistance. And we have sustained that and fought all kinds of adversities to continue that. And so when Mr. Campbell asked me if I would come to St. Helena for this panel. I rearranged my schedule because I was scheduled to go to Michigan for something else, so that I could be here, basically to lend my voice to the significance of community. And along with the question of land, you know, community has to be sustained. The longevity of the community depends on future generations. And those future generations need to be sustained. And one of the things that St. Helena seemed to be doing so beautifully for at least several generations was providing a place for the next generation. That's the only way community is going to be sustained. Because when people start spreading out, then you lose that core. And that's really why we're here. We're here to basically sustain the community, sustain the longevity of that community, which means sustaining the generations. You know, people talk about generational wealth from a monetary perspective. What about generational wealth from the perspective of land? And what I see happening, from what I know about what's the attempt to displace people on St. Helena, it's almost like reparations in reverse. And it's very, very disturbing. And I'm just so glad that we're here to basically to fight back. And I want to just finish by making a comment. Mr. Campbell referred to the Gullah people as a peculiar people, which is the title of my book. But I used that title, which the publisher was not happy with, but I stood my ground. I used that title because that's what the people call themselves. And they were a socio-religious people, and faith was everything to them. And that term, peculiar people, comes from 1 Peter, 2nd chapter, 9th verse. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who had called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. And so that's what they called themselves, a peculiar people. And in some ways they certainly were. They had embraced this faith that in some ways had been imposed upon them, but they took it and fashioned it into something their own, and something that was really germane to their existence and their own personal vision of what God and Jesus was to them. And that sustained them. And they were a chosen generation because they were the generation of freedom from which the other generation sprang. And let's hope and pray that we can keep that spirit of that first generation of a chosen people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I certainly appreciate the Penn Center and the university for this opportunity. As an environmental and land use lawyer, I look back to my childhood, think about the times that I was out fishing or doing things that in the natural world, and just the absolute beauty of our natural resources. If we think about the earth as a spinning jewel in space, that really incredible, how could this be here in the vacuum of nothing and darkness, and be as beautiful as it is. And then we think of the human population that covers the earth and how we treat that. It came to me that I needed to be trying to do something about that. Was how do we preserve that? Well, you can be on either, the one side or the other, and as an attorney I can be on either side of an issue if it's a legal issue. But even when you work for those people who want to develop land, you can teach them what the environmental law is and what are the rules and why are they followed, and kind of educate as you try to help them at least obey that unjust law, so to speak, that is controlling the land use. Nobody touches the earth in a community without the law of the community allowing it. And so it really starts here in the community as to what the law should be. And so working in the environmental land use area, you see all the aspects from, how are we going to be a people on this planet with the scarce resources that we are in charge of, and maintain and sustain ourselves and the unique beauty that we see in that nature. So I think what drives me is trying to help keep that humanity view, that we're all in this together, there's no other spaceship that we can get on and go somewhere, and that if we don't work together on these issues, that we'll work against each other. And so trying to bring people together, and the community is where that happens. It's becoming harder and harder to do that at national, international levels, but it can happen where people know each other, and that's why we're focused on. And it's got to start somewhere. How can we do that? Think about the extreme events that have occurred in your lifetime and perhaps shortly before, world wars or 9/11 or things like that. What kind of rallying and community spirit was there right after those events for the nation as a whole? Well, one would think that, how do we make that community survive? And really it's hard to do that without the calamity to have a common enemy. Climate change now might be that common enemy if we really focus on it. But even with that, looking at the changes that the climate is going to have on these communities, how do we preserve and maintain and sustain the ability to have these generations follow and be subjected to or enjoy the endowment of the nature that we were given? So I think from that standpoint, I want to commend this community, and say that I'm an interloper in it, having grown up in Columbia and coming here. It's my privilege to be here and to help with your voice, help make the local decisions become what we hope are correct ones for your community.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Honey Chilla. How honey to do? So that question, but what make me dear? I ain't been here. I ain't going nowhere tall. And dear from this Charlotte, grew up right here, mostly back and forth to work. Mr. Campbell make me work, call the house and things, but say get over here for do things. So that was I did today. But so glad for dear, because Penn School is the school of my mother, who's sitting right there, who used to play basketball in Darrell Hall, all right? It is where my father and aunts and all of them graduated from before there was St. Helena School, where the rest of us went on and graduated from. And so as Black Panthers of the island, I often let people know, if you want to start with my issue, start there, because we will roar when we need to. And so the thing about it is roaring to make sure that we keep the land. Growing up here, I'm here, and what set me on the mission is God and my ancestors and my elders. Because ancestors came to me in my sleep and gave me what became the slogan I've taken around the world, Huna must take care of the root for heal tree. And so that became the slogan of the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition that I founded. That was the first organization in the world to have the words Gullah and Geechee together. Because before that, people called you Geechees, or they said you were Gullah. And it was usually socio-anthropologists who tried to delineate and say one set was someplace and one set was somewhere else. This set's on the Sea Islands and that set's in the townships or on the mainland. Or you're in Georgia, you're this way, and you're in South Carolina, that's that way. Well, that was all psychological in order to say you are not one and the same. Thereby, you will not be able to collectively fight together to maintain your human rights, your land rights, your water rights. But devil mean for evil, but God mean for good. So that's why many people know I will correct them often when they put a space between Gullah and Geechee, because they're meant to be together, because we've always been together. We've always been inextricably tied to one another and rooted in this your land and things like that. They're from Jacksonville, North Carolina, to Jacksonville, Florida, especially upon these your Sea Islands. And so I would say to Dr. Washington, that faith and that power that my ancestors had, I know I have. And I know that there are others who are inspired and they have it too. So it's not what we were on St. Helena Island, it's who we are, all right? So when the Gullah Geechee national flag that y'all see here, it says, we be Gullah Geechee anointed people. And them peculiar people, no say, we be blessed by God and things like that, and we wouldn't dare you still, okay? Because as all of us know, there have been all kinds of odds of unjust laws against us, and there continue to be, but God is the greatest law of all. And so we know that God is for us because we are the anointed people. and we will continue to fight on just a little while longer. Thank you for having me.
Can I just get you to expand a little bit about on your comments, because some of what you're saying is talking about people redefining themselves or defining themselves and not accepting those external definitions that have been placed upon them. As you have been engaging in this work, what role has telling the story yourself played in bringing this to light?
Wow, that's a deep one right there. Because initially it played the role of finding out who would be my enemies. And they didn't all look like Jack. Okay? They actually came from your own community that did not overstand, as I like to say, because we've been under too long, it's time to be over something, did not overstand that folks that do look like Jack or that work in law, they are not the barometer. That people, because they have a degree, are not the barometer. You have intellect that God gave you as well. So now you muddle with anything like that and know who you is. You lived a certain thing. How can somebody tell you you didn't? Okay? So how is it that we, as close as we are to Savannah, Georgia, from here, how is it that if I'm on St. Helena and I'm born here, my first cousin born in Savannah, I'm Gullah, but she Geechee? That don't make no sense, okay? So I'm a computer scientist, so logic means a lot to me. And I know plenty of y'all said that gal been like that since they born. Right, I will question you. I'm not gonna just accept what you say. And so as I started reading books that others had written about us, that's when I realized none of them people were Gullah or Geechee. Whether they were black or white, they were not Gullah Geechee. So how can you tell me about my lived experience and that of many generations of my family when actually the same things you're each writing about in your linguistic journals, everything you're writing as your doctoral thesis, says that all of the things these people do that you're calling by two separate names say they're one set of people. And then I found out there were the Afro-Seminoles or Black Seminoles, they were the same people. I went and found out the Americans are the same people. But then I said, oh, I get it. But the purpose to divide you makes you feel weak. So divided, you don't stand. Do you see what I'm saying? So then if my job is to come teeth on the land, teeth on a culture, exploit it, I need you to think it's not yours. And I need this sister here to think when she's fighting, she got to fight it by herself because that ain't my problem because we're not the same people. And then I said, well, I can do what I can do. And what I've learned, I'm going to do what I was taught. Each one teach one. So when I put Gullah Geechee together with the slash, not the dash, because I'm a mathematician as well, the dash means minus. So when I did the slash, it was to bring them both together. Now with Twitter and Instagram, I don't even need that. It's just Gullah Geechee, right? So that we know we're united and don't allow someone else to come in from their cultural perspective and interpret for you. You have the right to self-determination. You know who you are, stand in who you are, walk in who you are, speak who you are. So in the global stage, when I was told, you're going to go to, well, if you want to go to the United Nations, you know, we'll help you go. At that time, I was sitting in New York City. So I said, of course, no problem. We had tokens then. They hadn't gotten to the passes yet. So I'm thinking I'm getting on the subway, right? So the next thing they said was send over your passport. I'm like, what? Why would I need a passport? And I said, well, where am I going? Where's the United Nations? I thought it's in New York. They said, no work don't get done there. You're going to Switzerland. I said, oh. And I was advised, you need to write your speech. You have to turn that in. And when you get there, please don't speak in Gullah, right? Well, I listened. I didn't agree. I listened. And when I got the chance to sit, God, and seemed like 1,000 ancestors stood next to me and said, girl, do what you came here to do. And so I started the first 2 or 3 sentences in English, and then I said, and as I'm being directed, look here, this year who my people done so. And so some people in here may not know, but the United Nations is huge. It is just that. And all of a sudden, the reaction was, what? And you heard all these languages of the world and people moving their arms like this because they were turning their knob, trying to say, what's going on? My interpretation's not working right in my language now because they're hearing me. And so that could shake you, but I didn't let it shake me because I knew I had only a little bit of time. So I kept going, and then someone went, shh, and that shh spread over that whole place. Now nobody could hear anybody else talk except me. And they heard it all in Gullah. And then when I switched back to English, the interpreters resumed and started interpreting in the languages of the world. When I finished, I was mobbed by people wanting copies of the speech. I ran out of copies of the speech. And African brothers like, sister, I have to have this paper. Where are you from? I said, I'm from the Sea Islands. Where is this? What is that language you said, sister? I said, it's Gullah. He said, what is this? I have to have this speech. I said, I don't have it anymore. This one's mine. So he says, okay, come with me. We pressed the wall. It was a door. We went in. All the printers, all the copies were out of paper. There was an Anglo guy down the hall. He looked. The guy said, hey, yo, with this paper. He said, look, and you know you're supposed to bring your paper. And he's like, I said, no, I need my speech. And the guy looked, he said, wait a minute. He walked over, he said, were you the lady who was just speaking over the whole thing in the other language? I said, yes. He said, come with me. He pressed another wall. We went in. He got me in an office. He said, it's her. It's the lady that was all over. They were like, you were great. What do you need? They made copies of the speech. And when I stepped out of there, that's when I met people who said, don't ever give up fighting. Keep fighting for your people. What you've done is outstanding.
And the first step in that fight is knowledge and the
Yes.
bravery to know who you are and use who you are
Yes.
to put that fight forward.
Yes.
Dr. Washington, I'd like to ask you if you encountered something similar as a historian coming into this place and trying to learn, gather, and then present all of this information.
Well, the first problem I had was getting the book published, because the gatekeepers did not want to publish a book that looked back to Africa. And I was making connections between Gullah, and by the way, Queen Quet, when I was writing the book, my advisor, I wrote it as a dissertation, and I used Gullah Geechee. And my advisor said, well, you're only writing about the Gullahs. And I said, but the people in South Carolina on the coast and the people in Georgia, I said, they're really the same culture. And they come from the same regions of Africa, and blah, blah, blah. But no, you're just, you're getting too broad now. So they didn't want me to do that. But I had trouble getting the book published because, not so much because of the publishers, but the gatekeepers are not the publishers, they are the historians. And I was talking about the connection between Africa and the United States, and they didn't want to hear that. Now the diaspora is taken as a given, but my book was published in 1988, and they didn't want to hear the word Gullah. They didn't want to hear anything about Africanisms and Gullah culture. So that was the problem that I had. But there's a man from South Carolina, deceased now, named Charles Joyner. And some New York university sent him the book, and he said, this is great. And that's how it got published. But Harvard, Yale, Oxford, they all turned it down. And then the book won 3 prizes. But that was the struggle. So these struggles are in steps. And the achievement that you made with the UN, I mean, that's monumental. But yeah, it's an uphill battle.
It is an uphill battle, and especially for our 3 panelists who have been looking at this legally from a variety of angles, what do you think, and feel free, anyone, to respond, what do you think are the really pressing legal challenges that maybe first have to be addressed at this moment?
too many to name. Talk about from a community perspective, environmental and land use. You know, it's trying to get enabling legislation from the state and federal government that lets communities preserve and really form the types of communities that they want. The enabling legislation has been done, of course, through the lobbying and through those that are trying to be developers. They're not really from the communities. And so we have legal battles often because there are disjointed laws that we have to follow about how you develop land and what you can do with your land. Private land ownership is certainly not unique, except that in the United States it is really kind of the primary wealth driver, taken, never given to the population with redlining and what the black people have experienced. I mean, the color of law should be read by everybody. And I think that the opportunity to help communities have a voice instead of just lobbyists in doing the enabling legislation for what the land use and environmental laws should be is, I think, the essential, most important of the many, many things that need to occur. In other words, give the communities a voice in the enabling legislation.
Yeah, right. Very true.
And I'll add to that. I think environmental law gives us an opportunity to right a lot of the wrongs that have been imposed upon us. It also is an area of law that needs to be influenced by various cultures. And I quoted Dr. Campbell in one of my law review articles, and his statement was, well, they'll protect the trees, but what about the people? We the people are the endangered species here. And I've advised all of my students that since then, plant some big trees at the edge of your property so they won't come take it. But we need to get to a place where we value the people as much as we value the resources that they are blessed to have and to own. And so in our work at the Conservation League, the piece that I bring to the table, the additive that I bring, is the equity lens. Everyone studied Bob Bullard, if you haven't, you should, about environmental justice and environmental racism. And he suggests that we look at all of these issues from the perspective of equity. Everyone's not starting in the same place. And we do a lot of things in the environmental community to protect our natural resources. But at some point, when does that one house per 10 acre zoning really get down to trying to exclude people who can't afford to put only one house on 10 acres? We might need to put the whole family on those 10 acres. And so I think it is important to look from all perspectives. And with our regulations on the water, I try to talk to folks and help them understand, everybody that lives on the water is not wealthy. And so we need to have laws that allow us to live in our communities just like the other communities, and have people take into account that we come to this land through ownership of purchasing these former plantations. No one wanted to live here back in the day. Now everybody loves it, right? But don't squeeze us out in the process of trying to protect what's left.
May I just add, just briefly, what I would say is space. Space in the law for cultural values to matter in decision making. And, you know, for example, I worked on a case in Pamplico about a pipeline, and the community there, largely African American, rural, and they voiced a lot of objections to this project, citing a pipeline in their community. And what DHEC's response was, well, we hear you, but we don't have to take environmental justice considerations into our decision-making process right now. And so we need to have that in the law, so they have to consider it and not just check a box saying, oh, well, we considered it, and well, since we got a pipeline nearby, it just makes sense to have a pipeline here. And that's what you see a lot with citing decisions of, well, you know, where are we supposed to put this new wastewater treatment plant? And there's one nearby. Well, you know, this community already has a burden on it because it's dealing with the one nearby. That doesn't give you license to just put it all on this community. So what I would encourage everyone to support that type of legislation, be it nationally, statewide, even locally. You can have local ordinances that talk about considerations like cultural or societal values that have to be taken into account in decision making, and that's what we need on every level.
And I think that's the kind of information that we need to hear and we need to know. Queen Quet?
I've been deposed many times and accused of being an attorney. And I always answer, well, first I used to answer, T said, I'm sorry. Thank you, Jan. Other lawyers have said it to me too, I'm sorry, Queen. Yes. I used to say, well, you know, I didn't pass the bar until the late Dr. Yusuf Van Clyde, who's a human rights, in fact, an award-winning human rights lawyer who taught me human rights law, said, don't say that anymore, because you didn't sit for it. I said, got you. He said, because you are one person, I believe if you sat for it without studying, you would pass the bar, right? And recently I talked to a cousin of mine who's a lawyer, and he said, you might not be a lawyer, but you know the law. And I said, that is true. I've had to study so much of it. And I just want to infuse into this that you all work from law books. I used to be the librarian for Matthew Bender. That was my last corporate job. So you know that's the largest law book publishing firm in America. And so looking through those law books inspired me to read and get sections of law out. And I never knew I would be using it for my community. But my thing is I'm a writer. So I had to think, again, that logic, who writes law? So my thing is I have participated in writing a lot of laws that some people don't know. And I didn't know people would know until lawyers came and said, you kind of busy, Queen Quet. I saw your name all over this thing here. And so it's good, even from the local level with our Cultural Protection Overlay District we have for St. Helena Island, to working on the Gullah, what ultimately became the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Act, okay, which is federal, but then always infusing when I'm deposed or put in court cases to protect burial areas here, our sacred burial areas and graveyards. I have infused human rights law because Gullah Geechees are recognized on an international level. But we don't often realize that international law supersedes domestic law and that we even have a right to use it in our cases, and to even bring in things like the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Act into cases when we're fighting for heirs' property or our land rights and so on. And so that's why I wanted to also respond on this, because although some of us may not legally be attorneys, we have a right and have done it and have helped to write law that now is held up as laws of land. And so many people here could be inspired to do the same, and I just wanted to mention that.
It's a shame that the International Criminal Court seems to be more sensitive to black experience in America than the United States.
Absolutely right.
Criminal Court, but
Yeah, that's another topic.
this strikes me as a brain trust here, and as I'm listening to all of you speak, I was actually thinking about Septima Clark, who is also out here at the Penn Center, and the schools that she started.
Freedom schools.
And we, as part of our program here, we certainly have student residences where they come, learn about this. And I wanted to ask all of you, what do the next generation need to know? What does the next generation need to do? I realize those are two huge questions, but
you want me to start and pass it all the way down?
Why don't we?
All right. Stop being lazy. That's what you need to know, younger generation that's in this room. All right. Stop it. Say it again. Say it louder. Stop being lazy. Oh, like we would have said, stop with the trifling. Let's get up off on a bunkie up. Okay. Stop just looking at your phone. Google is not God. All right. Okay. So, and that's from a computer scientist, because it's not really a phone, it's a personal digital assistant. We can talk about that outside. So, the first thing is really grasping that in order to truly do whatever the study is that you want to do, you need to engage in it with other people. And the best way to do that is the way we're doing it now. And so that you can actually learn from people who have already walked down a road that's clear now, but they had to cut the bushes down for you to get through there. And they can tell you what is a good practice, as we would say, best practices, and some that just avoid it because it's going to be a waste of your time and energy. But you have to be willing to get out of bed, off a chair, off a couch, off a bench, put your phone on off, or leave it where it was, and go and sit really like we did with our elders in the community. Be fully engaged, be fully present. That is going to be critical. And don't stop thinking that you can answer your phone, look on the TV, at Netflix, and also talk to people and retain it. Because I am really tired now of working with students, because there needs 20 of you to stand there to remember one sentence that I told you. And my 90-year-old mother would read you and send you for several switches if she had to deal with you. So the thing is that you cannot look for someone else to have done it and you just swipe it off the internet and copy. You want to be people who are going to be the trailblazers, that you are going to clear that next road for someone behind you to walk down and know it's not going to be easy. So the other thing you need to do is have a faith-based group of people that are your inner circle, that can pray for you, pray with you, and get a prayer through to God, not to hell. Because I'm telling you, some people seem to be praying to hell, not to God. And so you need to definitely have people that will be there for you in the spirit. Because sometimes, and I think all of us can attest to it, your body and your mind is tired. So you need someone to boost your soul, which will bring that mind and body with it, you see. And so definitely those are critical things to do on a daily basis. And the main thing is protect your own physical and mental health. And you do that by unplugging, even if it's from your mama and the crazy people you born into the family. Get away sometime, just go walk and appreciate what God has given us to be blessed to live in. Go sit under one of them oak trees and let it talk to your soul. You'd be surprised what you hear. Go to water somewhere and just breathe it in, and as I say, woosah. So if I could give you anything, those three things, I would say do that, but that third one bring you back to the first. Because a lazy person ain't going to even get up to go outside. So you're going to have to put that all together. It's not a hierarchical thing, it's a circular thing to do consistently over and over. And believe me, like the song we sing, every rung will take you higher and higher.
Thank you.
Queen Quet, I don't know that we can do anything to add to what you said. We can certainly echo and support a lot of what you said. Certainly, it's important for the young generation coming up to know what's going to be lost if they don't pay attention to it. And so how do you educate? It has to be a desire. And you don't have a desire about those types of things that require feeling and interaction and looking at a tree and enjoying it if you're every 5 seconds doing something else, or being distracted by things that ultimately are not going to matter. So how do you get that meaning in that generation? It's very difficult. You know, there's no real systemic effort by society to do more than grab your attention and get your money. And so it's very difficult, and only a community of people can do that, where there's a family community and a family discipline that helps do that, or it is a real community where you do things that get them out to learn what it is that's going to be lost if they don't pay attention to it. If they move away and let whatever happen, then, is it really their fault? Do they have a responsibility? How do you build responsibility in a young person? And so being involved in doing things is how that occurs. And there's no easy way to do it. Raising children and now looking at raising grandchildren, it's certainly a never-ending effort. As old as they are, you still try to teach.
Well, there is so much history in Gullah, Geechee culture. I think one of the things we can do is do more to get it out there. I think about that Septima Clark was brought up. I mean, this is one of the most amazing women of the 20th century. And most people don't even know who she is. There's a Septima Clark highway, and I don't know who I was with some friends, and they were asking, who is Septima Clark? And they were from South Carolina. And so that's kind of shameful. So what can Penn do to advertise this beautiful place, this beautiful space, the need to keep it? What about setting aside some time for retreats, for writing retreats, various kinds of internships? There's all kinds of foundation money to make people aware of this space, the history of it, the haunting beauty of it. You have a committee. Maybe what you need is an advisory committee of how to advertise this space and the significance of this community, not just to African Americans, but to America itself. It's a world treasure, as the United Nations agreed. So I think there are things that can be done, but it does take time, it does take effort, and it takes creativity. But it is there because the space is here, and anyone who walks around the cemetery next to Brick Church can't help but feel the spirit. And you don't have to be a historian, you don't have to be a native of this state. You can be anyone and walk through that cemetery, walk through that church, walk around this space, and get a sense of the people, both historically, contemporarily, and the possible. So I think that there are things that can be done, and I hope that one of the things that comes out of this meeting is something concrete.
Thank you.
After all that good advice, I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think one thing that, if I was talking to the younger generation, now I'm feeling old, one thing I tell or encourage them is not to lose hope about doing something, because as soon as you lose hope, you're not going to do anything. And you have to believe that you can make a difference. And the other thing I'd say is you don't have to do it alone. Because if you are alone, it's a lot harder to make a difference. Now, people certainly can and have, but it's a lot easier if you have help, not just to do your own work, but you can get some ingredients from somebody else, some advice from somebody else. You can make it a good stew of ideas. And when you do that, you have a lot better chance of really making a difference. And the last thing I'd say is don't feel like you have to have an answer when you start. Look at us. We don't have the answer. I don't anyway. They might. I don't have the answers, but it doesn't stop me from trying to figure something else out. And sometimes the answers change, and be ready for that too.
I guess I would have two suggestions for our young people. The first is to be courageous. Doing this work takes a lot of sacrifice, and often you have to try things you've never done before. If you looked at my resume, you might look at it and say, it's just a bunch of stuff that I've tried. But each of those things added to the basic knowledge. But it adds to the basic knowledge of what I have now, and so you have to try different things. The other is to know your history and learn it for yourself. Septima Clark is from the Charleston area. She was in the fields of the civil rights battles, and they took across town, put it through the heart of the black community, and put Septima Clark's name on it to divide our community. So, there's an old expression, pardon the expression where it says, don't tinkle on my head and call it rain. Understand the history for yourself, because sometimes people will make it up or hide your history so that you don't know that you've got that same power and strength in you. So that would be my advice to the younger people. To the older people, I would say, because we're talking about land and community, the good book says that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children, his children's children. So let's hold on to some of this land so we can pass it on.
Amen.
Thank you so much. I have a million more questions for this panel, but I know that the audience does as well. So we'd like to turn this over to you so that you can ask questions of the marvelous minds that are sitting up here with us. Would anyone like to begin?
Yeah, I'll yell. Ms. Rivers James, you used the phrase environmental racism. What does that look like?
So environmental racism looks at land use policies that end up having a biased impact on communities of color. And so Bob Bullard is the one who's sort of the father of this. And you could look at land use decisions and say, well, they're just making a decision based on the property values. But typically those property values will be lower, or they will assign a lower property value if it is African American land. So the siting decisions for landfills, for dumps, for highways and roadways, or the crosstown in Charleston. There are lots of parts of Charleston that they could have gone through, but they went right through the middle of the heart of the Black community. They justified by saying it costs less, but it cost us a whole lot more. And so environmental racism is something that you can fight against by getting involved in the land use planning process. It is a process that's open for all of us. It is democracy at its best and sometimes at its worst. So don't just accept what they tell you is coming to your community. Be involved. Go to the planning session meetings. That's what we are in the process of doing right now on the CPO in Beaufort County. By the time you see that deal on the front page of the paper, that deal's been done.
Yes, ma'am.
So be involved and get involved early.
Thank you.
See, I've got a question for Queen Quet. This will be a long answer. But you said the kids are lazy.
No, I said don't be lazy.
I think so, don't be lazy, but
Yeah, I didn't say they're all lazy, because they all
what is causing that laziness, you think?
What is causing
What is causing that
laziness
laziness, yes.
is they weren't raised right.
Thank you. Right, so it starts at the home.
Right.
Growing up, you know, we had chores to do.
Absolutely.
Parents don't give these kids nothing to do.
Right.
On the phone, watching TV, videos all the time. As parents, make the move. And tell your kids, do something. Get out of the house. Get off the bed. Go outside. Volunteer somewhere. In the summertime, school's out, go volunteer at Penn Center. Have the parents let the kids, tell the kids to do something. It's not only the kids that's like, why they're lazy? Who's in charge?
So you answered your own.
I got it.
And it wasn't a question for me, that was just so she could get the floor. Y'all go ahead. Go ahead.
I think we have another question.
I would like to just make a correction, because there are lots, not lots, but there are kids that I know that are very active. There are a lot of kids that don't be on, the parents don't let them be on the devices and all that. So there are kids, there are a lot of parents that monitor their kids.
Which is what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, just like my mama monitored us, my aunties monitored us, my uncles monitored us, our older cousins monitored us. Okay, that had nothing to do with whether you had a computer back then, because they didn't exist. It was about the fact of what your behavior cycle was and what your work ethic is. So if you don't have nothing to do, we're going to give you something to do that's going to be productive. I'm going to say this, and this may not apply to everybody in the room, but I know it applies to Black people. How many people in here heard be a credit to your race when you were growing up? There we go. So that's what I don't hear anymore. out of parents' mouths with all the hundreds of schools I go to in a year. I don't hear that. So you have to live that and be an example, like Dr. Gibbs has said, so that that work ethic and that monitoring you're mentioning is built into whole families and thereby built into communities. But when we've been talking about community, my thing about community means it unifies you what you have in common. Now, if I see your child acting a fool out here, and I pull your child aside, and you come to my house later to fight me, that's not community. So who's monitoring the monitors? See, that's a problem. So the children aren't raising themselves. There's a statement that says, what the children must learn, you must teach them. So now we don't know nothing, what are we teaching? So that becomes also a dynamic. So I never said all, that's why I corrected Dr. Gibbs. I never said all the children lazy. They asked me to give advice to young people. I work with young people all the time, and I tell them all to their face, don't be trifling. So they asked me, I'm telling you, don't be trifling. I didn't say everybody is trifling. That's different. I said do not be trifling. So just for the record.
And I think we have to be part of the village in a new sense.
Yes.
Where we have to create the spaces that will do what our elders used to do for us. Yeah. I think I see some other
Several
hands. Yes. Do I have help with microphones? Is there audience members?
Next time, Penn Center, get us to do sound.
My question is, it's a mental problem. I was raised up at Edge Point, down on the river, in the prayer house. I heard Dr. Campbell talk about the prayer house. It's a mental thing. It's going to the river, and remember when they used to have the battles, or when everybody had a boat on the river? It's a mental thing, and you could go down and get in anybody's boat, and you could go out fishing, and you didn't have to worry about it. It's a mental thing when you caught swim fish, and you could take it home for a meal. It's a mental thing. It's a hurtful thing. It's like a safe place. I went all overseas, France, England, Saudi Arabia, different countries. But when I come back home, that safe place is gone. I can't go back to the rivers. I can't go to the, I can't do it anymore because it's being taken away from me. It's a mental thing, and it's hurt. It's a mental thing. It's that I can't talk to my kids about it. The prayer house was mentioned here at the beginning. I know about the prayer house, and some kids pass by every day looking at that prayer house and have the slightest idea why it's there and what it meant to the community. It's a mental thing. We need to. It was said by Queen, said by Dr. Gibbs, and I'm saying we need to get down to teaching our kids about the culture. Don't teach me about what's going on if you can't teach me about what's going on here and while I'm here. It's a hurtful thing when I get in the community and I talk about Penn and somebody try to put it down, not knowing that if it wasn't for Penn, if it wasn't for these people standing up, where would we be? It's a mental thing. And I said again, it's a mental thing when you go to the river and you could catch fish, and now if you get one fish over, it costs you $1,000. If you one power over with swim, it costs you $1,000.
And confiscation.
It's a mental thing.
I would like to see discussion around creative uses for property. Because right now you have the baby boomers and the early generation keeping up with the property, the land, which is important. But the next generation X, they're not staying here. And when that generation, baby boomer leave, or die out, they don't have the same love for the land, and then it's sold without any talk of anything, because they don't see what we see. They don't see the hands that have been placed in our hands and see the crops and everything that comes from that. They just see that it's a quick dollar. So I would like to see a discussion of creative usage, that low maintenance, that we can keep the land, but also have it generate income in the future, revenue.
Oh, I can speak to that. I can speak to that.
Bring it down for just a moment.
Go ahead. You want to go first? Oh, you want it.
I think that is such an excellent point about how we make use of the property. And I want to credit Mr. Barnwell. I sat and talked with him about how his family had made a long-term investment in property. You can own land, keep it, let people put something on it, and they pay you for the rest of your life. And so when we were working on the Heirs Property Center, we didn't say that we wouldn't help you if you wanted to sell your land. Because if you owned $1 million worth of property and you couldn't send your kids to college, was that really going to help you? But if you work together, you can develop that property for yourself. You can set aside a piece for yourself. You can put a conservation easement on it so that it is always available for people to get to the river. But where you have family property, it's that family agreement that is the key to being able to preserve that resource. It is the family disharmony that gives developers the opening, like they did on Hilton Head, to buy a piece, and then they go to court and can evict you and buy land that was never for sale. So it really comes down to the family being able to work together, and when they do that, they can come up with creative solutions. You can do things to help preserve property even in the face of climate change. You can have a section of your property that is a bioswale, that holds flood waters, so you can stay on your high ground. But again, it all really revolves around working together as a family to understand that that land is a resource. Use it just like other communities do. It's a resource that kicks off revenue for a long time.
Thank you.
Now I'm a dovetail, because that's not the direction I was going to go, but I'm going to add to what she just said. When she mentioned the bioswales, that's part of the Green and Gullah Geechee Communities project that I'm leading and have been leading for the last year and a half or so with the EPA and now with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So as soon as the government stops being a bureaucracy for a little while and gets me the rest of the tools they were supposed to get here, we'll be doing some things specifically about what she said in terms of the ways in which you can preserve and conserve land. But we're going back to get to this money right now. All right, because what you asked about is being able to make money in the way that I know I and the other younger generation make money. A lot of that money is made online. A lot of that money is made in pop-up shops. So one of the things as the Cultural Protection Overlay District Chair that they know I came in the door talking about was economic empowerment for St. Helena Island in particular. And I'm always talking about that for the Gullah Geechee Nation. So we just had the South Carolina Minority Affairs Office come here. We're planning a Gullah Geechee business session for September. So make sure that you give me your email after this, so I will put you on that list for that, anybody who's Gullah Geechee and wants to attend. Because there are a lot of resources we don't know are available to us, or we can't access them because we don't have all our paperwork straight. So we're gonna make sure your paperwork's straight so you can access those funds. Because a lot of times the younger people are hustling because that's what they've heard. So you're hustling because you see that on TV, right? But you don't realize hustlers ain't business people. Hustlers do this lick for the day with what I got right now. A business person is planning for longevity. And a business person is building upon that which they started with, which is what I was going to talk about, and I did talk about this week at New Life Deliverance, building black wealth. Because you started off with land. What I educate a lot of younger people about that makes them then decide to stay here instead of leaving, is I said, so you want to be like who? And then a lot of times they mention some rapper they seen, or some stripper that they seen nowadays, unfortunately. So they mentioned that, and I said, okay, but that person is saying they hustling to get what? Well, they came out the projects that was holding. So that means that they lived in a place that all of us owned. because the projects they didn't own. So what do they get money for? Well, yo, they got a house now. I said, do they have the house or the bank got the house? Because if the mortgage company has it, that's not their house either. They can get put out. So I said, guess what? Your mama pay a mortgage? No. I said, why? Because she already had the land and my granddad and them left her the house and we live in that. Right. So you are actually ahead of the rapper that you say you want to be like. Or the stripper that you want to be like. You are already ahead. But no one put it to them that way before. You see what I'm saying? So I said land is an asset. It is not a liability. Just because you pay taxes, taxes actually are an investment. And you want an ROI, a return on your investment, then they stop listening. I said, so in other words, money begets money. Money make money. Take money to make money. You can't come out here running up in people's face with nothing and think they should give you money, okay? So you need to have something. What is it that you know is your gift and something you love to do? And then let's sit down and talk about how you can make money with that. That might require you living here in Beaufort and paying taxes like I do, but you actually have to travel a lot to make the real money. Yes. And then be able to pay for what you have here. Okay? I said that may be, oh no, if you make crafts, then you need to look at it as art and not a hustle. Okay? So you need to price it accordingly if it's one of a kind. So there are a lot of creative things that can be done in cottage-based businesses here in Beaufort County and up and down this coast. But a lot of us don't think of it that way because family members discourage you. They say stuff like, you in there cooking chicken again today? Well, why you ain't go get a job? That is her job. She cook chicken and sell dinners. And she don't beg you for no land tax money at the end of the year. You see? But sometimes we degrade each other in a way that discourages the youth and they move because of the negativity. Not because they don't love the land, but they move because it's the family that don't understand where they're coming from. Okay? So now everybody understands when I said my office was in my bag all these years because of COVID, they now understand working from home, working from the computer. They didn't for 20 some odd years. But I don't be begging them to eat either. I'm slim because I choose to be slim, not because I'm hungry. My mama cook all the time, I cook all the time. So I'm saying we can do a lot together. We just have to have, like you said, creative ways, and we're very creative people. People just haven't taught us how to capitalize on our creativity, but instead, as our good doctor said at the beginning, America has always capitalized off our intellectual property, and they still do.
Amen. Do we have any other questions? Getting your workout this afternoon.
All the time.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to kind of maybe comment off the question about the young generation. As one of the people coming from the young generation that has been fighting for this island and has been fighting for things in our area on St. Helena, I think that one thing that I come into contact with sometimes is that we have to learn how to interact with each other and how to understand each other from young generation to the old generation. I think sometimes there's a disconnect because, and I gave you the teeth to it. One day I was coming out of the grocery store talking to an older gentleman, and there was a young guy walking by and he had his pants sagging. And he said, look, and you want me to come to meet and you be fighting for stuff like that? And I said, well, sir, I said, tell him about it. He said, oh, I don't want to get shot or get cut. I said, watch this. I said, excuse me, young man. I said, come here. Yes, sir. I said, this young man, this older gentleman, I got something he want to tell you. I ain't got it, I want to tell that boy. I said, young man, he wants you to put your pants up. He said, okay, yes, sir. He put his pants in and he walks off. There are times when I say that, I say that to say this. There are times when I feel that the older generation has given up on the younger generation in terms of that, and that's why we're here where we're at. But the problem becomes that the generation before them didn't give up on them, so why did they, and what gave them the right to give up on us? So that's this that we must connect those sheep back and take our community back. I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Shane has come up on the panel too. Many of you speak of how this place once was, how it is now, and the new languages, I think, the new explanations that have to be made so that we can go forward again. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Right here?
Yes, I have one. I grew up here on St. Helena Island, and I have friends that have property on the river. Okay, and in the two cases that I can think of, they're landlocked. They really don't have an easement or any rights to get to their property. And in one case, I think that I don't. What can be done? Is there something in writing or something, a process or a procedure that can be followed to work with? Sometimes it's a new neighbor that came in from, who knows, New Jersey, New York, bought that property and now fenced it off, and now the owner who's been here for generations can't get to their property. And it's an ongoing problem, not just on the river, but anywhere.
Someone put on my property professor hat, and the challenge is American law never allows us to sell property that is landlocked. And so there is either an easement that already exists, or you can get an easement by necessity. And so two parts to this. If they have been cut off, they can call law enforcement to remove the barrier that is keeping them from getting to their property, assuming that they actually own that strip of land. The second thing is that whenever you're buying property, even if you don't have a bank mortgage, please, please, please get your land surveyed with iron stakes in the ground and know where your stakes are, because people are often wanting to push over into your space, and you need to protect every inch of that ground that you have purchased or inherited. But American law does not allow them to be landlocked. They should see a property lawyer about being sure that they can get their easement to access their property.
Can I add something on the back? Because we know that our sea islands have been eroding for decades, right, for centuries. What is happening, and I won't name him, but if y'all know the crooked surveyor that was here for as long as you, but yes. Okay, what he would do is if he came, because Jack is new, Jack moves next door to me. Somehow he's supposed to be surveying for Jack, but somehow between me and Jack, he keeping eighth of an acre. Okay, and eventually now his great grandkids and everybody owning property between me and Jack, because every time he never really surveyed just Jack stuff off. He always did something short and then he ended up owning the piece between. So now what is happening is those of us who've been there, we know where our posts are. And then these new folks are getting new surveyors, whether they're paying them under the table or not, or they don't know what they're doing. Because there's land that was eroded from that before. These people are surveying over into our land by a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, trying to say, oh, but, so someone tried that stunt with me the other day. Oh, but I was told my land's over here. I said, no, buddy, your land over there where that post is at. Okay, and so that post has always been where it is. That's where your land go over there. Don't start easing over here. So what happens in a case like that as a preemptive measure, because this has been always the driveway to go in and out to the water, and now this person's trying to ease over because some brand new surveyor they just got last month is trying to tell them, oh, you can go over here, where really some of their land is in the creek.
Right. And so with that, get your own surveyor. Make sure you know where your lines are. If someone comes up with a different survey, that's evidence in a court. And the thing about our land records in the United States is that everything is in the books, right? Every deed has a property description. They can go back to that from the first time that land was granted from the King of England and figure out where your land is. So please don't let it go by. There is a concept called adverse possession. And it is very often used against African American landowners. And it is if someone has used your land against your interest in a, what they say hostile, just meaning you didn't agree to it, then they're able to acquire title by adverse possession. There are ways to counter that adverse possession. The first is if someone's on your property, go to court to have them ousted. The second is if it's a fence between you and a friendly neighbor, you might want to allow them to keep that fence there. You can counter adverse possession with permission, but make sure that every subsequent owner knows that that has been done by your permission and you're granting them permission so that they can never say that they are adverse against your interest. But always, 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 one, good fences make for good neighbors, right? So if you can put some sort of fencing along where your stakes are, no one can make a mistake. And if some of that property, for yours or the other person that's gone into the creek, there's nothing to do about that, that's sea level rise. But that doesn't give them a right to come over across the boundary into your property. So I would say be sure to protect that with advice from a lawyer.
I think we have another question here.
Yeah, I got a question with the county. Well, it's one thing to say you can get the law enforcement to come and help you resolve this matter with the property owner on the right way for your road. Wherein, if I got a property, I'm black, and I fence my property off, and this white man comes buy some property, and he don't have no way to get home. Now the law is going to tell me I got to provide a way to him for him to get home to my property. Now if the white man buy the property and I need to get home, they'll tell me I got to cut another road or find some other way to get home. And it bothers me because it's happening in 2 or 3 different cases that I know that's going on now.
So I'll say this, for the law of easements, it all stems back to the piece of property that was the big piece from which these parcels were cut. And so they're going to impose the easement on the last piece of that big piece of property unless the easement was actually written into law. Now you might look in your deed and see an easement which would give them access across your property, but you just have to check your records, right? But if someone is coming across your property and you believe they don't have an easement, if there is no access to that property, you can chain it. You can chain it, and they cannot come across. Right? Now, there are a lot of paper roads, an expression called paper roads. If you look at the plat, a road might exist, but no one ever cut that road. And for convenience, they want to come across your road. We ran into this with my mother-in-law. Put a chain across the front, and that was the end of that story. Right? They can even put up a sign. They put up a sign, you can take down the sign. If it's your property, if you didn't dedicate it to be a public road, you can chain it across and only leave that to people that you want to give access to. But part of it does stem down to the parcel from which these individual lots were cut. But I would definitely follow up and make sure that they are, whether it's a public road, a city road, a county road, make sure that their records are correct. They may just be selecting a section that is the path of least resistance. So resist.
That seems to be the theme here. Resist, right. Know, learn, resist. Do we have any other questions? One, and I guess this will be our last one.
Yeah, as a community development person, I'd like to ask you, Faith, and the others that live in this, what variables do you take into account when you start thinking in terms of balancing land ownership interests, community interests, and development? I remember us celebrating when Bill Clinton built his office on 125th Street. Now we are crying because of gentrification, as they call it. In Williamsburg County, we brought in a landfill that we paid to get built, and then we had to sell it because the community got in an uprising. But there seems to be a conflict of interest between the haves and the have-nots in a community that somehow determines outcome. So I'm asking you litigants to tell us what side is the state and the laws typically on, the haves or the have-nots?
Law shouldn't have sides, number one. It's supposed to be equitable. And it's only equitable if people make it that way. The people who have the money have the lobbyists and they get the laws made. That was part of the enabling the laws to be fair I talked about earlier. So it's got to be equitable, and we can undo some of the wrongs that have been done in an equitable manner, but we need to start by stopping the inequity. So enabling those laws that take out the lobbying and put in the values that people that own the land, that are living in the land, that community is back. Community is really the most important thing. And there are different communities in the same land. If you look at the county, depends on how do you define your community. I think the Gullah Geechee have a really great heritage that gives you the opportunity to self-identify and provide a voice that's more unified than many communities can. When you get the not in my backyard crowds that don't want to see this, that, or the other in the backyard, it's the same kind of thing. Whatever economic, it could be a great suburban area, they don't want to see that highway going to the Ports Authority in Charleston going through their backyards. They have $1 million houses, okay, but if they were not that kind of house, that would be the same issue. So I think that it's really the community involvement that makes the laws, that makes them equitable. We're not going to do that without that overpower the inequity that money talks in Congress, that talks in the State House, and talks in county councils, that talk in city councils. Just the truth, sorry.
I know you said only one more question, but my question is this. So it is inequitable, and there are lobbyists, but how do you undo that? So the thing that's been through my head over and over is listen, learn, pay attention, and vote. Because you vote in people who make laws, is that correct? Is that?
Yeah. And they're supposed to uphold them too, but we know they don't want us to do that,
Yes,
right?
but they can't uphold them if they're not made equitably.
Yeah, they can uphold them, but they're not made equitably. That's why you had slavery. So they can. What I'm saying, that was legal, and it still is, reach the Constitution in certain cases. All right, so you can do that. You don't want them, is what you really mean, but they can't do it. What I'm saying is that people say, well, all politics is local. You have to remember, every elected official has a constituency. You are the constituency. And that which you don't want, you overthrow it. As I was taught in history class, that's what they did. They get out the people that they don't want. You get the laws changed to be something different. That's why we had 4 different civil rights laws in America. There were 4. There wasn't just the one in the 1960s that people want to talk about, 1964. There were 4, okay? So you have to continue, as we said, to resist. You have to also continue, as we've said, to be involved. You have to continue right now to be engaged. When we're even talking about money, many people may not follow, but I encourage you to follow GGTV.com, our blog. I posted yesterday about the multi-millions of dollars that are coming to the Gullah Geechee Nation now. They're not coming by osmosis. They're coming through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, your former boss, from the Department of Commerce, because we fought for it. We went to DC and we were our own lobbying group, so to speak, to say what we want and what we demand of our federal tax dollars and where it needs to come back to. Okay? But you have to have an effective argument and also an effective speaker. Okay? Because sometimes it's not the message, but it sure is the messenger. And you can then speak truth to power and sometimes overturn situations people wouldn't expect. And I'm going to end on this. Many people try to say, well, we got the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Act, thank God for President Obama. I said, President Obama had nothing to do with that. And they can look at me like, what? I said, no. I said, I know, because I'm the one that helped it get done. I said it was President George W. Bush who signed that law, and it was the Congress who did it. So for black folks, that was amazing. You see what I'm saying? But it happened because we the people, okay, actually stood up and stood on our rights, and we what? Resisted, and we continue to be involved. So that's what we encourage y'all to do, is continue to be involved and continue, what's that R word too? Resist. There we go.
And I'll just follow up lastly with Mr. Wilson's question. Tale of two situations. When someone in your neighborhood rezones and goes to a commercial use, if you have empty property, they're going to tax it at its highest and best use, which is now commercial because your neighbor brought it in across the street, right? And so I personally watched this happen to our whole community. One went commercial and the rest we fell like dominoes because who wants to live next door to that? That is the beauty of what the CPO does for St. Helena.
Right.
Everybody on this island could walk out a billionaire with a golf course. But you as a community said, we don't want the golf course because we don't want our community's taxes to go up. And so it is the community response and fight for the CPO that counters one little establishment coming in and changing the nature of your land use and your tax base forever. So please continue, resist and fight and stay united on the CPO.
Please join me again in thanking this wonderful panel. I know I have
something, doctor, on that last note. Hold on, just a little while longer. Hold on, just a little while longer. Hold on, just a little while longer. Everything might be alright.
I would like to just turn this over to Dolores Pringle, who will give us a little bit more information before our dinner together.
Thank you, Val, and thank all of you on this wonderful panel. And thank you, Queen Quet, for that rendition. And thank you all for being here. This has been a wonderful program. And so,